Welcome to the Entrepreneurship and Sustainability Conference 2020, coming to you live from the city center right here in the heart of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'm Jessie Chahel.
And my name is Raj Arya. Over the next 2 days, our action-packed program will be focusing on entrepreneurs at large and, of course, not forgetting the general community as well. We'll be talking to an illustrious array of speakers from around the world who will be speaking all things sustainable, but more importantly, regenerative. Right, Jessie?
Absolutely, Raj. And this brings me to make this very proud announcement. For the first time ever, Regen Asia 2020 is the conference that will happen in accordance with the Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Conference that is ongoing right now. Now, as we get warmed up, I want to say a big shout out and thank you to all of you joining us across the world, from Costa Rica to Australia, San Francisco to Canada, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, just to name a few.
Yes, very exciting indeed. And of course, some of the topics that will be covered over the next 2 days would include biomimicry, ancestral technologies, intergenerational justice, among others. And of course, the overriding theme over the next 2 days is about taking action today, not tomorrow, not next year, because our next generation's future depends on us right now.
That's right, and our actions. And you will hear these few keywords in the next 48 hours: regenerate, rebuild, and restore, all in line with the United Nations SDG, or Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. Now, of course, it gives me great pleasure at this juncture to bring on and hear from the man that has put this entire mega event together. Let's hear it from the founder of ESG TV and the organizer of the Entrepreneurship and Sustainability Conference, as well as Regen Asia 2020, Mr. Louis Clovis.
Hi, thanks Jessie and Raj, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us here live. It has been a great honor journeying throughout this period of time and setting up this conference. The purpose has been a great purpose, a need for sustainability, a need for growth, a need for regeneration. I start off this day with great gratitude, especially God above, and mostly to all the speakers who came about, and they were not just out of randomly, they came at the right time for me to choose and put the whole thing right in place, putting the right topics so that it builds to a complete understanding of what regeneration is all about. We have, over the years, we had a lot of different meanings of what sustainability is, how it was defined by different sets of people. And what we want to do right now is actually to put it in place, position it right, and lead you to understand what regeneration is all about. In a nutshell, it is all about, it comes back to you. Regeneration starts with you. You need to take accountability. You need to be a steward in leading your life, and therefore you can lead the people around you. Take, for example, if an individual who doesn't practice any of this, for example, how you handle plastic, how you handle electricity, energy, water, and all those things in play in what they call it as recycle, you're not going to feel the true essence of what sustainability is all about. It comes back to you. You can't depend on somebody else, and that's where it stands right now. Like people like Greta Thunberg, they are fighting out. She's fighting out there for intergenerational justice. She's fighting for the future of our next generation. as we have been given this generation for what the planet is right now, it is our duty and responsibility now to pass on to the next generation how the planet is going to be and not a pile of filth. And that is the one that we're fighting. This conference is not just a conference, it is an activity-based session, and that's what I actually built it to. And everybody who comes for it, just know that for a fact that we have a message for everybody. We want to not just change mindset, we want to change conscience to a different understanding of what things are out there. And I hope the 37 speakers we have lined up for the next 2 days for you, and about 18 workshops we have, I hope it'll bring some change, some level of shift in your conscience to make a difference in your life and be accountable for the people, for the planet, and not forgetting prosperity is important, profit is important, but never before people and planet. With that, I thank you. I give you back to Jesse and Raj. Thank you. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you so much, Louis, the driving force behind today's conference, as well as the founder of ESG TV. Then the message that Louis has mentioned is very powerful, that it's a call to action, right? That we need to take action today as opposed on relying on others. We should take responsibility, don't you think?
That's right. The onus is on each individual on this planet. And I think also to sort of remind everyone and perhaps ourselves that we need to change our conscience and not just our mindset, because that seems to be the operating center of the human being. And if we can achieve that in changing and shifting the way we feel and the way we think, then perhaps we are one step closer towards achieving the main aim of protecting our planet. Of course, it's also important to remember that the future generation is relying on us right now to take care, and so that they can inherit a planet that is livable.
Hopefully, at the end of the day. And of course, as you mentioned, it's all in your consciousness. And individually, of course, you can take action and make things happen, but we need to do it collectively as the human race, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think, although it may sound like a big agenda, obviously a global agenda, I think we can start small. Baby steps is the way to start in our own community, from our homes, in our own areas, in local schools, universities, at the workplace. Little steps, they will go a long way, Raj.
That's right. Ripple effect. All you need to do is lead by example, influence your social circle, the people around you, and henceforth, and if you go by that methodology, the exponential effect could be immense. So, end of the day, the action is in your hands.
That's right. And that is what the next 2 days will bring you, a variety of topics and content. We hope to keep it interactive as well. So as you join our different sessions, please feel free to leave your questions. We'll hope to get them all answered. We'd love to hear from you as well, your feedback, your comments, your suggestions, your ideas. We're all in this together. And remember, no one gets left behind. We have yet another keynote speaker in line awaiting, joining us all the way from Costa Rica.
That's right.
That's right. And that is Edward Muller. He is a game changer, ladies and gentlemen. He's an environmentalist, a scientist, and an activist as well, who's deeply passionate and also involved in addressing challenges in biodiversity as well as regeneration. He's even participated in the development of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Muller.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, for the opportunity to be sharing a couple of ideas with you. It is my pleasure to be with you, and you tell me when I can start my presentation.
Right.
Go ahead. Okay. I want to share the screen and show a PowerPoint, which actually is easier to understand with images, what I'm going to talk about. So why do we need regeneration? We already know that the planet is under great stress. We're seeing humanity reaching several tipping points. We are seeing how our planet is degrading in a very accelerated, exponential way. And on top of that, we have now a little present from nature that has put humanity on its knees. And actually, I call it present from nature because it is a good fire drill This virus is a consequence of our actions of destroying life on Earth, destroying biodiversity, destroying nature. And it could potentially have a vaccine or a treatment, whereas planetary collapse will not have a way back. The extinction of biodiversity, extinctions are forever. And runaway climate change, which we're starting to see already, is also pretty much irreversible once you get to the tipping points. So we have time to react, and we can actually use this huge opportunity that nature is giving us to decide how we want to live in the future. We really need to change our behavior and respond to a different reality for the future. So we know for quite a long time that we should have crossed the bridge to a better relationship, a harmonious relationship with nature. We still haven't done it. Now we're stuck there. We either run to the other side and start learning how to live in peace with nature and with all life on Earth, or we can walk back slowly and have a few years, a few decades maximum living on this planet. It's been 33 years since we came up with the famous definition of sustainability that would be not compromising the ability of future generations to have their own needs covered. These future generations are here and they're angry with us, and they have all the right to be angry with us. They know the planet is dying, their planet is dying, their future is dying. They know we had to act already a while ago, and we need to act immediately if we want to stop the destruction of humanity. It's not anymore only the planet. And they don't really care as we cared for stuff. You cannot eat money. You cannot eat the things we accumulate in this consumption society. I personally think we are at a critical historical moment for humanity. Our political systems are failing. Anybody who saw the debate last night in the US can clearly understand that the central governments are not appropriate anymore to defend the needs of the majority. We're seeing climate disruptions, we're seeing all sorts of different societal breakdowns, cultural breakdowns, and the economic system has been broken already for a while. So going back to the priorities that we have to start facing, and this is where actually humanity is falling short, because we seem to have problems identifying what the true challenges are that humanity faces. And the Stockholm Resilience Center published already in 2009, and a second version in 2015, the planetary boundaries, which define the safe operating space for humanity. And basically what they already did was map out the main global changes that we're experiencing. And these changes have actually moved us into a new geological era, which is the Anthropocene. In other words, the main planetary changes that we're seeing right now are caused by us humans. What many people don't seem to realize is that biodiversity loss is the most critical factor that is getting humanity out of the planet. Very closely followed by fertilizer use. And fertilizer use has remained under the radar. The petrochemical industry, together with the academic world that has promoted the use of poisons on our food and poison nature, by the way, and poison even humans, have managed to stay under the radar. And it's time that we bring them up front. Land use change is the third cause, and climate change is the fourth cause for us to not be able to stay living on this planet. Now, the most interesting thing is that agriculture plays a huge role. 80% of global changes are caused by agriculture, the way we produce our food. So if we don't change the way we produce our food, we're not going to make it to live here long on the planet. Agriculture is responsible for about 30% of climate change, and this bias towards climate change at the world level is actually avoiding us to take real action on the important things. And those areas in red that you see in this graph are the most important things. They're the areas that have taken us beyond the zone of uncertainty on the capacity of the planet keeping us. We have reached many agreements in terms of biodiversity. The Aichi targets and the strategic plan that were developed in Nagoya. I was actually a negotiator for Costa Rica in that meeting. It said that by this year we'd have biodiversity values integrated into business plans, into government plans, into government accounting, corporate accounting. Nothing of that has happened. Biodiversity is actually already recognized as the very real end of the world, and no one is acting like it. And the report that just came out a few days ago tells us that countries have failed. None of the countries have met even an important part of the targets we had set out 10 years ago. So we're in exponential loss of biodiversity, and this is getting very critical. In terms of climate change, we were told and we were warned many, many times that by 2020 we had to reverse our trends. Otherwise, we'd go into a very dangerous zone of non-return due to runaway climate change. At the beginning of this year, the reports already said we're not making it. And even with COVID and the reduction of emissions due to less flights and less cars being used, we're still not managing. So even with the shutdown due to COVID, we are not reaching the targets. We are now getting to really dangerous tipping points where methane release is being accelerated by outrageous temperatures close to 40 degrees centigrade in the Arctic Circle this summer, with all the fires in Australia and in Western US, in Siberia. We're getting to these famous tipping points. And it's not like we don't have the science. We have everything mapped out. We know exactly what we're doing wrong. We just don't really take it seriously. This is the best scientifically documented planetary extinction. We have all the data, all the information, all the knowledge to know what we're doing wrong. We just have forgotten one thing, to turn everything into wisdom. And that is what our elders used to do. They used to sit down and meditate. If you look at Wikipedia, the definition of wisdom is actually the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. So we have to really go into that experiential self-knowledge, the ethics, and the benevolence to our decision-making process, both at the company level, at the individual level, at the community level, at the governmental level. It's time that we actually stop and take a deep breath and look around what we're actually doing to ourselves. So the question is, are we going to be mere spectators of a new normal, or are we going to actually be active and co-create a better future? And I believe we have the responsibility. These are all children which I have interacted over the last years. These are the children that are suffering. These are the children that are paying the bill. It's not the children of the rich that live in the cities that are paying the consequences. The immediate consequences are faced by rural children, children in poverty, children that have been left out of development and of society. So the Earth Charter tells us in its first paragraph that we stand in a critical moment in Earth's history when it is our turn to choose if we want to stay or not on this planet. So as the world becomes increasingly interdependent and fragile, the future at once holds great peril and great promise. And I focus on the promise. We still have an opportunity to move forward. But to move forward, we must recognize that in this huge, magnificent diversity of cultures, of life forms, we are one human family and one Earth community with a common destiny. So we have to go together, the whole planet forward. We cannot keep on pointing fingers. And another important issue is we've been told that we need to adapt to climate change, adapt to planetary collapse. I don't agree. I think it's a totally wrong perspective. It's a reductionist scientist approach. We have the opportunity to build the future we want. So if we're told that we need to adjust to a collapsing planet, I'm not going to stay sitting and waiting for that to happen. I want to be part of the solution. One of the biggest issues is that we were taught, and this is where environmental education failed really, really badly, is we were taught that we need to take care of nature. The truth is, nature does not need us. It can take care of itself. It has shown us over the last 6 months that we gave it vacation how resilient it is and how willingness to bounce back with life, what we have to do is learn that if nature does not function, we don't exist. And as I said, it sent us this little present, which is actually giving us the opportunity for a fire drill. It could have a treatment, it could have a vaccine, but we need to act, and we need to act now. We cannot bounce back to the old system. And many companies, many people, many countries are trying to find a way to get rid of environmental regulations, any restrictions to bouncing back the economy. But the economy that we had is what got us into this mess. The way we did our business models, the accumulation of money in 1% of the hands on the planet is not the way forward. So we have to recognize, number one, that we are nature. We are not the owners of nature. We're part of nature, and we depend on nature to keep on living on this beautiful planet. So we need to re-emerge. We need to be reborn, basically. We won't solve these issues with cosmetic fixes. We really need to rethink. And I was presented as an activist. Yes, in the past, I used to think about revolutions. Now I think actually of an evolution. We need to go from the traditional ego society, ego economy, where the man is on top, the woman is underneath, and all life at our feet, transition through the eco. And I think that's where some organizations are still stuck, because we actually need to transition to seva, which is humanity in service of life on the planet, where we give more than we take. And if we can reach this mindset in short time, we still have a great opportunity to build back the world to a flourishing future, a world of abundance and not scarcity. Our whole economic system built on debt and on scarcity is totally wrong. So we can think of this, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the Three Horizons model, but the business as usual is losing the fit for purpose. And we need to move to the viable future, this regenerative future. So organizations like my university are in Horizon 2. So we're trying to push out of the old system, but we need innovation. We will not solve the problems of Horizon 1 with the mindset of Horizon 1 and the tools of Horizon 1. We actually need to be very innovative, very creative to be able to transition. And Buck Fuller said it very clearly: don't fight the existing system. To change something, build a new system that makes the old model obsolete. And that is what we're actually doing when we talk about regenerative development. So actually, we need to transcend the human thinking of superiority over nature and elevate the importance of cycles, relationships, and the care of life. This new alternative way of understanding the world is more like a recovery of our bond with nature, the rebirth of the feminine principle, the principle of caring. We should actually have a lot more women in power making decisions than men, because the women have that feminine principle, which Leonardo Boff describes as the caring, capacity for caring, the capacity for belonging to a greater whole. And that is what we need to move forward. And that can only be done through the spiritual dimension, which many universities just freak out when you talk about spirituality. And many of them confuse it with religion, and it has nothing to do with religion. So we need to move away from old tools, old measurements. Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen and Jean-Paul Vitossi already said we are mismeasuring our lives. And GDP, the gross domestic problem, as Lorenzo calls it, is very strongly correlated with inequality. So the higher the GDP, the higher the inequality. It has never been related to development, and we still use it to measure countries and how they're progressing. That is totally incorrect. So we need to be able to unlearn from these old metrics. There are alternatives. Donor economics is one of them. Amsterdam chose donor economics to emerge and rebuild post-COVID. And that instrument actually allows us to think of what is actually development. I'm partially from German descent. And if we look at Germany, Germany has been unsustainable before I was born. So the ecological footprint of Germany is way above the biocapacity. And if we look at the donut in red on the outside, are the planetary boundaries at the national level that Germany has way surpassed. Yes, their social threshold in light blue in the circle in the center is perfect. I mean, perfect life, but at what cost? So Germany has achieved that standard of living for its population using resources from the rest of the planet. It doesn't have the resources to satisfy that. If we look at other countries like Australia, a huge continent with a small population relative to the country, and look at its footprint. I mean, it's way beyond the biophysical boundary. Yes, it has a 100% social threshold, but at what cost? This is not a development model to follow. Now, who is to blame? Is it the government? Is it business? Or is it actually us? And I think it's us. If we want to change, we have to start changing us at the individual level. Stop consuming the way we're consuming. Stop making decisions the way we make decisions. And the change will come from within the people, not from any government or the UN system. I don't expect the UN system or any president to solve our current issues. We have to solve them together. If we compare Malaysia with Sri Lanka, we see two totally different models. Malaysia has actually a lot of red in social threshold, as has Sri Lanka, but Malaysia has all that red, and on top of that, it has exceeded the biophysical boundaries of the country. So there is something wrong with that model of development. The case of Sri Lanka, it is way below its physical boundaries, but it still has a lot of social empty spaces in red. So this is a powerful tool which we have actually started using. Here's Kate Rayworth in the center of the photo, through the Regenerate Costa Rica initiative, where the basis is we build the future we want. So we want from civil society a bottom-up approach to develop the country. And we're linking this to the global level. We're launching in a couple of weeks a beautiful initiative called Bounce Beyond that is going to help these next economies flourish. So we don't want to bounce back to the old system. We want to bounce beyond, and that requires creating new infrastructures for finance, creating new infrastructures for society, creating new ways of education. And this is a global to local and local to global feedback process. So actually, this is a donut Costa Rica. Our social threshold is bad in the sense that we have growing inequality. This inequality has accelerated due to the free trade agreements, to the neoliberal process in the country. But we haven't really exceeded so much the planetary boundaries. And so what we're actually doing is identifying which areas are the best to act with, how to bring back the planetary boundaries and eliminate the social empty spaces that we have. So how do we get to a good social threshold within our own biocapacity of the country? We're not doing this alone. We're doing it with a lot of different partners around the planet and locally, using the best systems around, Savory Institute for Holistic Grazing, Regenerative Communities Network, which is born from Capital Institute on regenerative economy, the Earth Charter, Dylan Economics, Blue Marble Evaluation. All these powerful organizations are helping us develop this new framework for development. So basically for us, regenerative development is a departing from the reductionist approach. We need holistic approaches. We cannot solve the current problems, poverty, climate change, global change, whatever, with reductionist approaches. And our academic system, regretfully, is based in reductionism. Our journal system, the science journals, are reductionist. So we need to move to this new way of looking at life and understanding that the functioning of ecosystems is the basis for life to continue. So it's not taking care of a polar bear. It's actually understanding that we depend on a functioning planet. And we need that new symbiotic relationship with nature, which we had for hundreds and thousands of years, and we've now lost it over the last few decades. So we also need to measure development based on hope, based on happiness, based on education, and not based on GDP. So it's beyond minimizing impacts, which is the dimension, the horizon one, where sustainability is still in. And how do we integrate these 6 dimensions in a holistic approach? basically based on the bioregional approaches on the territory. So we work through these dimensions and not within the dimensions. So true transdisciplinary approaches. It is complex. If you map it out, and we're using 7 vortex to do all this mapping, you can start identifying all the different components that have to be taken into account. This is only one small map. We're actually funding a lot of this through Seeds, joinseeds.com. It's a global currency, cryptocurrency, which is a decentralized autonomous organization, so totally different than Bitcoin, and using powerful instruments like the Blue Marble evaluation. So what does it mean on the ground? It means that we need functional landscapes, no matter if it is urban or rural or conservation or production. Every single landscape has to provide ecosystem services for humanity to keep on living. We also need social regeneration, where we have true participation of society in decision making. Local governance will be the future. Central governments will probably go dying off, and local governance will take a real true role if we can empower communities and make them understand and have the capacity to self-manage their futures. We need, of course, regenerative economics, where the community of life is a benefit, not only profit. We need to regenerate the cultural design of our societies, the sense of community and care, awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of the future to be shared with everyone. And we need regenerative politics. I wish we had a lot of young women making decisions instead of old men with white hair or orange colored hair, which are not making decisions for the good of everybody. And the spiritual dimension, which is for me probably the most important one. If we want action, we need to go to the hearts of the people, to the values of the people. So going back to agriculture, which is the cause of 80% of our planetary changes, we have to understand that agriculture is biology, not chemistry. If it is chemistry and it is so good, then let's certify the product's chemical and put a label, this is chemical. If you take in the externalities like cancer, all the syndromes that are now in children with allergies and autism, a lot of these are related to the use of pesticides and chemicals. And nitrogen kills the soil. We also need to bring in other knowledge sources, indigenous knowledge. This is a friend, Isla Candon, Indian from Mexico. And this is a barren land, wasteland that was regenerated. And on the right, you see Manuel Castellano with 7,000 years of millenary knowledge. And on the left, you see a famous Western university that wasn't able to regenerate the forest. So Manuel has achieved more than 5% carbon in the soil at 50, 60 centimeters deep. So it is very important for us to understand that the Western science is not the only source. It is important, but it's not the only source. Here we have some of the Western sciences now telling us that if we do regeneration, if we do regenerative agriculture, holistic cattle grazing, mixed forestry systems, we can actually go back 157 parts per million of CO2 equivalent. That is getting back to a normal atmosphere. Some of the holistic scientists say that we can achieve that in less than 30 years. So instead of looking at electric cars to solve our problems, let's look at the way we produce our food. This document just came out a few days ago. It is really powerful. And you can see that regenerative grazing systems alone, converting degraded soil, degraded land to regenerative grazing systems, can capture more carbon than what is emitted by humanity every year. So together with regenerative cropping systems, regenerative grazing systems, we can actually reverse climate change in very short time. Now this requires a different education. So education for the future is the future generations need to know that we build the future. And we're still training them in professions that don't exist anymore or won't exist. Probably the 10 new professions that will come over the next 10 years, 9 of them still don't exist. And our universities are still training people to solve our previous problems, our past problems. We need to train them to solve the future challenge that they're going to be facing. And we need to focus on what are called soft skills, which I call the important skills. I mean, the technical things Kids are learning on YouTube. You don't need a teacher to tell mechanics or tell technical stuff. But we do need to educate them on these soft skills, which are the real critical skills: collaboration, co-creation, conflict solving, conflict resolution, all these other things that are highly relevant for the future. And this, we need to ask their questions. You know, what is that we need to learn to solve our future challenges? How do we learn it? Are we going to learn it in the classroom with the teacher standing up in front of a bunch of kids sitting in desks? That is not going to happen. Why do we need to learn? And where do we learn? And how do we measure what we learn? The biggest stupidity humanity has made in education is thinking that by doing exams, we can actually determine how much a student has learned. And that is totally wrong. And also standardizing education. Every kid is different. Every kid has potentials. And we measure them with one measuring stick. So we need to move away from the competition-based education of the MBA programs. It's not about competition, it's about collaborating, co-creating, where a farmer that has never gone to school has as much to say as a Nobel Prize. So we need to actually combine different knowledge sources and co-create jointly our future. At the University UCI in Costa Rica, we have developed several new programs, and in January, we're going to be launching several others together with Ubiquity University at the global level for regenerative entrepreneurship. And it is a huge possibility for new professions: regenerative tourism, regenerative agriculture, regenerative economics, local development. There's so much opportunity here for new jobs. It's amazing. These programs have been so successful. We don't really, we're not really capable of satisfying the demand. So we have to join efforts. We have actually created also the Regenerative Communities Network with Capital Institute. So these are bioregions that are actually doing regeneration. So the students are going to be on these virtual academic programs, can then choose where around the world they want to go and actually practice regeneration. So cases like Regenerate Costa Rica, we can accept students from around the world to actually see how you do regeneration on the ground. And instead of having degrees hanging on the wall, we're looking for a passport. So in the passport, the student can report his contacts, his achievements, his networking, which are probably a lot more relevant for the future than having a diploma hanging on the wall, which he managed to get through doing exams. So I just hope that my son, who's now 8 years old, my younger son, will be able to thank me for having tried to give him a future. I don't want him saying, how did you end up wasting any chance I had for a future just for you to be living in your satisfaction. So maybe I'm lucky enough and he can thank me for having changed the way the world is going. I still have hope. Humanity is waking up, and especially now during the COVID. And if we exchange experiences and values and enrich ourselves, we can really complete ourselves mutually and move to this new future. And those people who are denying, who are with obstructionist attitudes, forget it. Let's not fight that system. We need to move into a new universal solidarity, and that is what we require. So I ask, how do you want to emerge after COVID? How do you want your community or your country, your planet to emerge after? And what are you going to do? How are you going to be part of the solution? We cannot keep on pointing fingers at the people to blame. That's one of the things kids like Greta have to learn. It's useless to keep on pointing the bad things. We need to have Greta tell solutions so all the young people can actually understand. We're actually setting up a global program starting in the next months to educate any kid beyond 10 years old on how to do regeneration, and using Instagram, all those networks that they are using right now. So my question is, will we act on time? Will we really give these kids the opportunity? And that transformation that happens in the caterpillar to a butterfly is what we actually need. We need to rebuild and regenerate ourselves from the inside. So regeneration starts by regenerating ourselves, our family, our friends, our community, to the country level and to the global level. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Edward, for that presentation and keynote speech. In fact, some very salient points, Raj.
Yep, definitely, definitely. I like the way you look at it from a business perspective, about the economy, about the leaders, politics. Politicians obviously play a big role in driving and leading the change and all that, don't you think?
That's right. Edward, I just wanted to revisit some of the very salient points that you've made. You said we need to be actors and co creators of our future. And this involves us relearning or unlearning. What would you say are some of those starting points, Edward?
We need to change our priorities. I mentioned already that we had to understand that we depend on a functioning planet. The planet does not depend on a functioning humanity.
Yep.
So we are dependent of the planet keeping us alive. If we could have understood that a long time ago, an environmental impact assessment might be legal, but it's immoral because it allows us to do damage. And right now, we cannot keep on doing damage to the country, to the planet, to our community. So the whole thought of linear extraction from mine to garbage to waste is totally wrong. And the circular economy kind of tries to fix that, but it's still within the first horizon. So if you want to be able to move forward, study the three horizons approach and see how you actually can move away from that mindset, because we will not solve the current problems. And that is one of the problems with the SDGs. They are very top down and they're very mechanistic and they're very within the same framework of thought.
But
So,
Edward, you were involved with that phase of developing the SDGs, and now you say that there is a problem with it. It has a top-down approach.
okay, yes, I was several times in New York, especially for SDG 17, and every single session started out with the person, I won't mention his name, thanking Nestle, Coca-Cola, Syngenta, Monsanto for their support for that meeting to happen. And if you look at SDG 17, the corporate sector is a savior, and the way to implement SDGs is through the corporate sector. If you look at the Pope's encyclica on the environment, it actually points the finger on the corporate destruction of the planet. So I'm not against corporations, but they have to reinvent themselves. So yes, the SDGs are fundamental. I'm not saying we don't use them. They're fundamental, and they have included a lot of different topics that the previous efforts of the UN system had not been able to achieve. But we need to go beyond that mindset. We need to go beyond circular economy. We need to go beyond philanthropy. We need to go beyond corporate sustainability or corporate responsibility, sorry. Corporate responsibilities is cleaning up a little bit of your junk. We need to change business models. So any business, no matter what it is, gives three positive outcomes, like the B Corp or the Sistema B in Latin America. Money, environment, and community have to benefit from every single activity. The planet is too much beyond in damage that if we don't regenerate that capacity, we just won't survive. So we cannot eat gold, we cannot eat money.
Right. Obviously, it makes sense. The corporations, it just can't be a PR exercise. Obviously, you need to be doing it because you want to do it rather than purely for the benefit of consumers, benefit for marketing and all that. Now, we have a very interesting question from one of our viewers as well. Regenerative entrepreneurs, how can they get involved? How can they start off if they're interested to get into this space?
I suggest, I don't know who is aware of Humanity Rising. It's an event that started 22nd of May. Every single day during the week now. Before it was every 7 days, all 7 days. Now it's only during the week. From the 12th of October to the 16th of October, log on to Humanity Rising. We'll be working exactly on the development of the knowledge platforms that are required to train humanity to do regeneration for all ages. So if you come to those 5 days, it's 2 hours a day. You'll be able to follow us and help us, because there's going to be a mural to have a global participation. We have over 20,000 people listening into Humanity Rising every day. We actually organized an event from July 23rd to 29th. You can also follow that on the next economies, Donor Economics, Regenerative Economics, Wellbeing Economy Alliance. Bouncing Beyond was there. But that part of capacity development, we'll be developing and exposing what we're going to do on those dates. But anyway, just look us up on the internet, and we are already offering programs for regenerative entrepreneurship.
Well, that is Humanity Rising. Be sure to check that out. Edward, one other observation I made. You said one human family, one earth community. And that's the sort of mindset that we need to move forward with. You keep repeating these words, bounce beyond and not just bounce back. It seems to me you're saying, let's go back to the basics in terms of tapping into humanity and the human spirit. And a lot of times this gets confused as well. We've got another question that's come from one of our participants today. Alvin Long asks, how are we able to empower marginalized communities through the innovation while they are way behind from the basic norm? That's right, we're in the new norm now.
Well said.
And one of the key, perhaps, findings of his research, he says, is the governance and, or rather governance to end the sustainability program, if I can read this correctly. Basically, what is required to ensure these are able to sustain innovations? Edward.
If you want to solve any community's problems, don't bring them the answers. Ask the questions. It has to be a down-up approach. And the best tool you have to work with communities is giving back their self-esteem. They have to recover their cultural basis. If you do not do that, communities won't be resilient. So you have to work at that level, giving them back. And actually, many of the cooperation and philanthropy things actually increase the dependence of communities and breaks them apart. There's nothing worse than giving somebody money without him asking. At the end, you'll turn him into a beggar. So it's the opposite. It's going and asking the questions, sitting with them, and helping them feel that they can actually solve a lot of their problems. And actually, you can solve 80% of the problems that humanity has without much resource and without foreign aid, just by solving behaviors, by solving community issues at the local level. And you have to bring in the kids because they are able to dream. So when you establish a vision, you have to do it with young people. The old people have a list of current problems that are solved as their vision, whereas kids have imagination, they have creativity, and we need to bring the youth in to co-create those solutions and that innovation.
Well said, Edward. Yeah, basically, end of the day, we shouldn't have a top-down approach. We should have a bottom-up because it's the future generations who are going to have to take the lead moving forward.
Thank you very much, Edward Mahler, all the way from Costa Rica, sharing his thoughts and, of course, his presentation on how we need to bounce back and be resilient. I guess, ladies and gentlemen, there couldn't be a more crucial time for us to reverse climate change, protect our biodiversity, and restore our planet.
Yep.
Here's a reminder, a clarion call from Edward as well, reminding us that we need to take this seriously. We have the data, we have the facts. Let's act before it's too late. We don't need to build more castles. We don't need to build electric cars. What we need is to solve fundamental, basic, on-the-ground issues.
And I like the way he said humanity needs to wake up. But end of the day, for people out there, communities, businesses, it's about dangling the carrot or the stick. Because, you know, it's all about self-preservation. It's all about oneself. But as you can see what we're going through right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, Mother Nature has responded. And now all of us have to take note and take action because it's impacting us on the very basic level, which is our everyday lives.
Absolutely. A shift in our conscience towards the decisions that we make. Back to basics once again. We need to give more than we take. That rhymed a little bit.
Yeah, well done, well done.
It's time to bring on our next keynote speaker, Raj.
That's right. And now moving on to our next keynote speaker, who's still on that side of the world in San Francisco, USA. He's a senior fellow at the Post-Carbon Institute, a serial author, and the authority on all things climate change and energy issues, especially in relation to fossil fuel. With that, we have Richard Heinberg with his topic on resilience thinking. Hi, Richard.
Well,
how are you
greetings. Doing? I'm doing well. It's great to be speaking with you from so far away by the magic of technology.
There you go. One positive things of modern day advancements, and hopefully we can use that to take humanity forward.
We can't wait to hear from you, Richard. The stage is yours.
Great. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint going here. Let's see. Now, can you all see the slide, or do you see a whole bunch of slides?
Not on presenter mode yet. You're on the. You have to just put the presentation on and then.
Yeah, let's see.
Go to the slideshow.
There,
Yeah.
that's better. Great. Okay, well, I'm going to be speaking mostly about the concept of resilience today, and its significance for this moment in history. I'm actually speaking to you from my home in Santa Rosa, California, not from San Francisco. And Santa Rosa is a place that's been beset by a whole series of natural disasters related to climate change. We had a devastating wildfire in 2017 that wiped out part of the town. Then in 2019, just last year, we had very serious flooding that took out many houses and buildings. And then just 2 days ago, we had another devastating wildfire. So our little town of it's about 150,000 people has had more than its share of disasters recently, weather-related, climate-related disasters. And I think it's a harbinger of what many places are going to be facing. And in many cases, it will not be just a single kind of trauma. It's likely to be different kinds of challenges converging from different directions. So that's why the concept of resilience is really gaining cachet among environmental analysts and leaders. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of sustainability, which was the watchword for several decades, the idea that we have to remake society so that it can be maintained over the long term. That's still very important. But the reality is that we've already pushed the boundaries beyond what is sustainable. And as a result, we have impacts that are already arriving, not just that are inevitable, but that we're already having to deal with. And that's why we need more resilience. Now, what we've learned here in Santa Rosa over the last few years is a few lessons. First of all, people in times of crisis, people really band together and help one another out in all kinds of ways. And it really, for the most part, calls forth really the best of human nature. The tricky bit is that if the crisis is sustained for a long period of time, that well of good feeling can run dry, and people can get very tired and traumatized, and existing inequalities in society can be worsened. Here in Santa Rosa, for example, after the wildfires, the cost of rebuilding increased, the price of real estate went up, and so people who had low incomes suddenly found they couldn't afford to live here anymore, and they had to move someplace else. Also, the natural impulse of people in crisis is to want to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Well, that's certainly understandable. But in some cases, and I would argue this is true for us globally now, it's the normal way of living, the normal way of doing things, our business as usual, that's actually creating the crises. So getting back to normal is not the answer. Another thing we've learned from these crises is that the best time to build resilience is before the crisis arrives, because once you're in crisis, then the best you can do is to minimize the casualties and get through it. And then if you have some time later on, then you can get back into the resilience building business. But if you're not actually in crisis right now, it's really important to be building resilience into your community. In order to understand the concept of resilience and how to go about building a more resilient society, it's important to start with systems thinking. And this isn't something that we're taught ordinarily in schools. Systems have boundaries, they have inputs and outputs, stocks and flows, and two different kinds of feedbacks, balancing feedbacks and self-reinforcing feedbacks. This is not a place for a systems thinking course, but I would urge you, if you haven't had a systems thinking course or read a book on systems thinking, that you do that, because there are some basic concepts that are really important to get. I'll cover them very, very briefly, but this is not really enough to get you going. Take, for example, a food system. If you wanted to diagram that in terms of feedbacks and stocks and flows and so on, it would look something probably like this. And to the layperson, the uninitiated, well, this looks like mumbo jumbo. It's impossible to understand. But all of these symbols with the pluses and minuses and the arrows really do mean something, and help systems scientists to understand the relationships between the components in systems. So I mentioned before that understanding feedbacks is really important. Self-reinforcing feedbacks are one kind of feedback. And here's an example. If we increase our energy usage, chances are that's going to increase carbon dioxide emissions, which will destabilize the climate. And that's going to lead to more very hot or very cold days, probably more very hot days, which means more people are going to be turning on their air conditioners and using more energy. And so this is a feedback loop that just keeps getting worse and worse. This is only one of many feedbacks that's involved in climate change, but this is just one little example. Now, how do we reverse that feedback? Well, you have to start by reducing your energy usage, which reduces CO2 emissions and climate instability, and so on. So in that way, you can create sort of a virtuous cycle, but you have to understand what's going on if you're going to do that. If you just find that suddenly you have way more hot days and your only solution is to use more energy, you're not going to solve the problem. You may cool yourself off for a few afternoons, but you'll be exacerbating, worsening the underlying problem. The other kind of feedback is a balancing feedback. And we all know about balancing feedbacks because we experience them all the time. Homeostasis, the process by which our body temperature remains relatively constant, is the result of a set of balancing feedbacks inside our cells, inside our respiratory and circulatory systems, and so on. The thermostat in a room or in a house is also an example of a balancing feedback, as are predator-prey relationships in nature. As prey species proliferate, that causes predator species to reproduce more, to take advantage of this increased food source. And that causes the population of the prey species to be depleted, which then forces the population of the predator species to decline. So you get these lagging cycles of predator-prey population. So In short, we need more balancing feedbacks and fewer self-reinforcing feedbacks. If you're a system scientist and you're examining a system and you come across a self-reinforcing feedback, you can be sure that that's going to be trouble. A healthy system is one that's characterized primarily, if not entirely, by balancing feedbacks. So here are some of the problems that we're facing in the world today, and they appear often to be completely separate, nothing to do with each other. It's just a coincidence that somehow all of these things, biodiversity loss, climate change, water stress, food insecurity, increasing economic inequality, political polarization, increasing flows of refugees. It seems like it's sort of a coincidence that all of these horrendous problems are converging on us at the same time. Well, in fact, there often are relationships. We know that as climate change worsens, that worsens also biodiversity loss. It also affects water stress, more droughts and floods. And we could go on. Climate change also impacts food insecurity, as does water stress. Food insecurity leads to increasing flows of refugees, and on and on. So if we want to understand this system of problems, we have to understand the relationships between them. That's systems thinking. And that's the basis of the kind of diagram that I was showing you earlier. Well, the fact is that our world system, our global system, is experiencing very, very serious self-reinforcing feedbacks. And the mother of those self-reinforcing feedbacks, if you will, has to do with fossil fuels, because fossil fuels have given us sources of energy completely unlike anything that human beings had access to previously. Fossil fuels represent millions of years of ancient sunlight that was gradually, over more millions of years, compressed and transformed into materials that were relatively easy to access and that represent energy that's stored, easily transported, and easily used. So over the last 200 years, we've increased our energy usage globally dramatically. Per capita energy usage has increased eightfold, 800%. Meanwhile, population has increased during that time, also eightfold, 800%. So that's 64 times, 8 times 8 is 64, 64 times as much energy that we're using today as we were using in 1800. And the vast majority of that energy is fossil fuels. As you can see in this diagram, we're still using what this calls traditional biofuels, which means basically firewood, cattle dung, and so on, as we were 200 years ago. And we're using just as much of it and even more, but we've added more energy sources on top of those, including coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear, and some modern renewables like solar and wind. So altogether, we've increased our energy usage dramatically, and energy is what makes the world work. Both the natural world and the human world, the human economy, is entirely based on energy. Often economists think of energy as just one component of GDP, but really it's the whole show. With more energy, you can do more things. With less energy, you can't do as much. And with so much more energy, we've been able to increase the rate of resource extraction, resource transformation, manufacturing, and therefore consumption. In order for all of this to happen, we had to have some things in place. We had to have a culture of private ownership of resources. We had to have a culture that supported capital investment and that supported the invention of new technologies. All of those things were present. Actually, they were present 1,000 years ago in China, ancient China. And the Industrial Revolution almost got its start 1,000 years ago. The Chinese were using coal in quite large quantities, actually. They were developing many new technologies. Capital investment was beginning to happen. But the Chinese government saw the emergence of industrialism as a threat, and they suppressed it. And so instead, it happened in Britain 800 years later. And we're in the full flowering of industrialism today. This is a diagram of the economy that you can easily find on the internet. And this is the way most economists understand the economy, with producers and consumers. Well, what's missing here is, of course, the planet. All the resources that we use have to come from somewhere. They come from the planet. And therefore, as we're using more resources, we're depleting the finite stocks of resources, including fossil fuels, that nature originally put in place. As a result of increasing energy usage, we had economic growth. Producers produced more, consumers consumed more, and the economy grew, and population grew. And everyone said, well, this is wonderful. Economic growth came to be seen as the one important thing. Every politician promised more economic growth. Every economist said economic growth is what we need more of. And during the Great Depression of the 1930s, we had a problem, particularly in my country, the United States, which was a problem of overproduction. With all of this cheap energy and manufacturing potential, it became possible to make more stuff than people were accustomed to buying and using. So politicians and industrialists collaborated, and they came up with a solution to the problem of overproduction. And the solution was essentially the creation of the consumer economy. So this included several components: advertising to talk people into wanting more stuff, consumer credit to enable people to buy more stuff than they could actually afford. And this led to all kinds of new debt instruments and financial instruments and government management of the economy. Suddenly the economy became a thing to be measured with GDP and unemployment. We created central banks in order to manage interest rates and the velocity of economic growth. And the result of that is something that we've gotten very used to. Probably all of us on this call have grown up in the era when all of these things are just taken for granted, as though this is the way people have always lived. Well, of course it isn't. It's radically different from the way people lived before fossil fuels and before economic growth. But growth is perilous. Growth is one of these self-reinforcing feedbacks that I was talking about earlier. As the economy grows, it uses more stuff, population grows, and therefore we need more stuff and we need more growth. Growth feeds on itself, but growth always implies a doubling time. If you have any quantity that's growing at 1% per year, just 1%, that quantity will double in size in 70 years. If it's growing at 2%, it will double in size in 35 years. So we've gotten used to thinking that the economies of industrial nations should naturally grow at least 2% per year, maybe 3 or 4, or in the case of China, maybe 7% per year. But what does that actually mean? 7% annual growth means that the size of the Chinese economy is doubling every 10 years. So over how many decades can you continue to double every 10 years the amount of resources being extracted, the amount of coal being burned, the amount of waste being dumped into the environment? Well, obviously a few decades, but certainly not many. We can't continue doing this for centuries or thousands of years. This is an unsustainable way of living on the planet, but by definition. So the global economy has doubled in size in the last 25 years. So what does that mean? It means that just since 1995, we've used half of all the non-renewable resources ever used in the entire history of humanity, going back at least 10,000 years, and you can go back into prehistoric times before then. Add it all together, and it's basically the same amount that we've used just in the last 25 years. Now, the realization that there would be limits to growth is certainly not original to me. This is something that environmental scientists saw quite early on. Back in 1972, a team of scientists at MIT in Boston used early computers and systems dynamics software to model the global economy. And through various modeling scenarios, they came up with some proposals. The standard run scenario, in which basically business as usual continues for decades to come, looks something like this, with a peak and decline in world industrial output in the early 21st century, a peak and decline in pollution, a peak and decline in food per capita. Available natural resources begin to decline before the year 2000. And it looks pretty grim. So the limits to growth scientists presented this to world leaders and said, well, look, this is not a guarantee that this is what the future will look like, but it might look like this if we don't change what we're doing, if we don't reduce population growth, if we don't reduce consumption and stabilize consumption at sustainable levels. And unfortunately, world leaders listened to this and they said, well, no. we have to continue economic growth because we have engineered our global economy to require it. And so therefore we would prefer to come up with justifications for why growth can continue forever, even if they're fanciful, even if they're completely unreasonable. We would rather believe in those fairy tales than actually have to do something about our consumption and population. This is what population looks like. We're just coming on 8 billion now, probably get there around 2024, where we were at 4 billion, just half that in 1974. All of this together, population, consumption, has impacts on our world, increasing rates of pollution, resource depletion, habitat destruction, and of course, climate change. So we see the relationships between all of these things, between energy usage and population growth and economic growth and so on. Where do you intervene? One of the obvious places to intervene would be with regard to energy. And mainstream environmental organizations have largely pulled back from advocating an end of economic growth or an actual reduction in global consumption. Instead, they've advocated a conversion or a transition from our reliance on fossil fuels to a reliance on alternative energy sources. Some advocate nuclear, more commonly solar and wind power. And the proposal is that we'll be able to continue growing population and consumption, but we'll be able to do it in a way that's not so destructive of the planet. Well, I'm entirely in favor of alternative energy and making some kind of transition to renewable energy sources. And this, by the way, is a book that I co-authored on this subject, and you can download it for free at ourrenewablefuture.org, and I highly recommend it. David Fridley and I spent a year. David is staff scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and his field is energy analysis. So I was able to benefit from his expertise and And it was a very fruitful year of work. The conclusions we came to are there's very little likelihood that nuclear power will be able to grow substantially to offset fossil fuels. And solar and wind are inhibited by some serious problems. They are intermittent sources of electricity. And that means we have to do something about that intermittency. Energy storage, a lot of people talk about batteries, and that's important. But of course, batteries require energy and materials for their consumption, and also they're expensive. Also, batteries tend to store energy over short periods of time. So day and night, diurnal intermittency can be offset with batteries. But what about seasonal intermittency? What if sunshine and wind vary from month to month or from season to season? Well, you need different strategies for that. Probably using solar and wind power to make synthetic fuels out of captured carbon dioxide and hydrogen from water and put those together, and you can make some kind of synthetic fuel that you can then use to operate aircraft or ships or big industrial machines or high heat industrial processes. Some things you can electrify directly, like automobiles, electric cars. But there's a huge problem of scale with all of this, because even though all of these things are technically possible, the scale of our current energy usage is mammoth. It's extraordinary. And imagining that we can replace all of our current energy usage with renewable energy sources and continue to grow our energy usage at the same time is quite unrealistic. In fact, that was our conclusion after a year of analysis and study. So if we want to make that transition, and it's necessary, obviously we can't continue using fossil fuels because they're changing the climate and they're depleting away from us. But if we want to transition away from fossil fuels, we're going to have to reduce our energy usage, and substantially so in big industrial countries like the United States and Europe, while we're doing that. Again, that's not a popular idea. Very few policymakers want to hear that, but it's the only realistic pathway ahead of us. Now, if we do that, if we reduce energy usage, then we put ourselves in a virtuous cycle where we actually are able to solve a lot of other problems at the same time. We are able to build societal resilience at the same time. Now, resilient scientists have studied resilient systems, resilient natural systems. That's where they started their work back in the 1970s. And they started, for example, by looking at how forests recover from forest fires. And they saw that forests as systems go through a cycle, what these scientists came to call the adaptive cycle of renewal. And these adaptive cycles pass through phases of exploitation and growth, then conservation, where the capital, if you will, of biomass has built up to its maximum extent in the forest. Then at some point, there inevitably is a release of that capital in a forest fire or some other kind of event. And this is in social systems, this would be called collapse. But the material that was and the organizational capital of that system is released to reform through a period of reorganization and further exploitation. Well, this is our situation as a society. We have exploited the earth to a dramatic extent. We have built up a global society that's extremely large and interconnected, and we're about to pass through a phase of release. So our role, those of us who are aware of this, is to help society as much as we can make that release phase survivable, so that humanity is able to come out the other side, so that it's not as destructive as it might otherwise be. So major foundations and think tanks are talking about resilience currently. There are two different ways of discussing resilience, and many of the big think tanks and environmental organizations are taking what I would call a conventional approach to resilience, which is assuming industrial, consumer, urban society.
To jump in here right now, thank you so much. We
Yes.
are a little bit constricted with time. I would just like to give you a couple of seconds to summarize and round up your presentation today.
Sure. Sorry that I've gone over time. Resilience is a subject that is a subject of intense research among environmental scientists right now. And if we work at building a more resilient society, we come up with solutions that work not just for one thing. For example, with carbon farming, we're solving the problem of climate change by drawing carbon out of the air and putting into the soil. But at the same time, we're producing healthier food. We're producing more rural occupations for farmers because we'll need lots more people on the land to do carbon farming. It's transformative for society. So resilience thinking is all about transforming our way of life so that solutions support one another rather than having a self-reinforcing feedback that's making more problems all the time and making those problems worse. We're actually producing solutions that are reinforcing one another and making further solutions that much easier. Okay,
Richard,
so that's...
Thanks so much for that, for all the insights on resilience thinking. I think it's a very powerful notion, right? Resilience thinking. We have to change the consciousness, as we were talking about earlier, and in terms of spreading the word, spreading that message that all of humanity is aligned on one path.
That's right. The question of, or the concept of resilience, as pointed out by our keynote speaker, Richard Heinberg, to change or go down to the core of systems thinking, the very fundamental. And I guess his call to action is we need to be resilient on so many different layers. Richard is once again helping the world transition away from fossil fuels, also to talk about the effects of growth and the acceleration of climate change. We need to get through it, he says, through the crisis and minimize the impact and casualties that we are facing right now. This is a global issue as well. Once again, a call to action. It is on each and every one of us.
And the best time to do this is before times of crisis as opposed to after. So we all have to have a clear state of mind and to enroll everyone on a mass basis in order for us to move forward. So something to ponder about.
That's right. Truly exciting indeed. We've just heard from 3 keynote speakers. The formalities, so to say, are slightly over. As we relax and ease into the next 48 hours, ladies and gentlemen, lots of topics coming your way. We're going to take a quick breather. Raj and I need to go grab a cup of coffee. Oh, well, Raj doesn't drink coffee. More on that later. Just wanted to say that upcoming in the next few minutes is our speaker all the way from Taiwan. Ms. Julia Chiang joins us, and she's talking about how nature gives us an architecture for us to solve complex human problems, Raj.
And the topic is biomimicry. It sounds like something you hear from a science fiction movie. So I think all of us are very, very excited to hear what she has to say very, very shortly. But we'll take a quick break right now,
A quick break, and we'll go straight into a video we want to showcase and show you about women in East Malaysia and the state of Sarawak, touching on issues of reproductive health, inequality, women's rights, children's rights, so on and so forth. We'll go right to that. Stay tuned. Lots more happening right here on ESG TV.
The women of Sarawak in Malaysia and Mindoro in the Philippines are no different. Climate change has taken a toll on their communities, and the women are burdened the most. In Mindoro, there is a decrease of fish catch caused by climate change and an increase of childbirth, creating an imbalance to the fishing community's needs, as the lack of family planning creates a vicious cycle of poverty and leaves them vulnerable to disasters.
Fishermen, fisher households, where we conducted the study in Oriental Mindoro, have bigger families. So they're even above the average family members of four. They go as many as having 7 children. And fishers being the most vulnerable, uh, partly because they're also the poorest of the poor, dependent on the coastal resources, are most affected by climate change because of the decreased fish that they get and that they catch, which is the main source of food and livelihood of the fisher households.
With population growth in rural areas, the need for the awareness on sexual health among these areas are a necessity. With less fish coming in causing less income, families are not able to provide for their children's needs, including their education. In return, their children end up with the same hardship that their parents have gone through, taking over the same jobs, leaving the community in a continuous vicious cycle that wouldn't be sustainable in the future. In Sarawak, the women of the Penan and Kayan tribe are left in their homes as the frontliners in natural disasters, since their husbands are away to work. As deforestation and rainfall increases, severe flooding poses as a major threat to their livelihood and safety.
Marung kami do ni tugu lupano ni adang kami busahala adang kami do alang jita ngayat na uri na kami tugu lupano ni am tangayat sununut tukta ilaw kumantala abilake tati tilaw iat na ke lo belajar ta tugu pinta udara lepati ke sununut tukta kuman katalang antatuhu palim.
The Penan tribe has also been encountering problems with the deforestation process, as the timbermen who come from logging companies take advantage of the women.
When we do our development processes and our planning, when we do not have greater insight into our ecosystem and how the ecosystem functions, and we don't take that into consideration, it brings tremendous impact to the communities. And this impact, as I said, based on location, based on class, based on economic background, are very critical because they impact on how these communities cope with these changes. And many times they are unable to cope with these changes and they face many, many difficulties. So one aspect of it is to look at sexual and reproductive health and because sexual and reproductive health just not only look at reproductive health, but also look at the holistic health approach of a person as an individual. It's also important because in terms of body politics, in terms of our bodies and who owns women's bodies, and the right to one's body, and that is something that's far deeper.
It is clear that sexual and reproductive health and rights is an important priority for climate change action and dialogue. It is central to their social and cultural identity and a key to empower resiliency. Recognizing women's voices by making policies through a gender responsive approach can make a community stronger and prepared for a continuously changing world.
Men generally will go on to a much more leadership capacity, but women are really the true champions for climate change actions. They are there, they get their families together, their children together, their husbands mobilized. They are the champions. And they do it so willingly and so open-heartedly. And that's the reason why, yes, they accept that. Yes, that's fine. But I would like them to express themselves, articulate themselves, and celebrate. I think this is also about celebrating how they build resilience. They are coping. They are not waiting for anybody to come and tell them, oh, you should do this or you should do that. They are coping. They are finding technologies. They are finding ways forward, and they are working very hard at the ground level, at the grassroots level. For me, for doing this research, is just coming to them and embracing their stewardship, basically, their environmental stewardship. Embracing them for all the work that they have done within their community. And that's not an easy task. And especially not an easy task when you have to do it invisibly.
And you're back on ESG TV with me, Raj Arya and Jessie Chahal. It's truly shocking to find out that we are living in the 21st century and we still see this happening right at our doorsteps. In fact, here in Malaysia as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, that sometimes perhaps we are oblivious or ignorant to the sufferings of our fellow humans around us who live in non-urban areas, who have been stigmatized or have been marginalized, especially as you move away from city centers out into the outskirts as well. What we've just seen is a regional research documentary on sexual and reproductive health and rights of women. Circumstances are such, but I think moving forward, Raj, what we need to look at is to together build a more resilient but empowered community. And salient points made, as we heard in the video as well, that yes, women are victims of climate change. That is the truth, but we need to come together to find a way out of it. Body, our sexual rights, our body, we decide. And women are and can be the true champions of climate change. They just need to be empowered. And that starts with you and I right here, right now.
And how we can go about doing this? Obviously, all of us will have to play our role. But I guess one stakeholder who could take the lead could be the government, for example, through creating awareness by the public, through us, through the political system, through our members of parliament, our state representatives, to highlight that some areas, economic growth is still not there. Infrastructure, education, healthcare, all these pertinent basic human rights. Correct?
Absolutely. And this can happen through dialogues within communities, government, other NGOs, other authorities, policy reforms as well. Another great place to start. We'll be taking a quick break. When we come back in just a moment, we'll be joined by our next speaker on biomimicry. So interesting, Raj. I
Fascinating.
definitely want to tune into that. Julia Chiang joins us all the way from Taiwan. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.